Hey folks, John Kelly, welcome back. Law enforcement life coach with your Sometimes Heroes Need Help podcast. And let me tell you, our heroes need a lot of help when it comes to managing our finances. For all the money that we make, listen, unless you're living or working in an agency that's got one street light and one stop sign, and that's downtown, the majority of you out there are doing pretty well financially with the money coming in. But where is it going out, right? Where are you spending your money? What are you saving? Do you have a budget? Do you have life insurance? How are you planning for the future while living in the present? All these questions are going to be answered because we're sitting down with Rebecca Jameson. She's a Priority One financial coach. She is married to a Leo, so she's got that first responder family finance thing. She's got a front row seat for it. So we're going to sit down with her. We're going to talk all things money and how you become financially healthy. And what does that look like? So without further ado, please help me in welcoming Rebecca to the Law Enforcement Life Coach, Sometimes Heroes Need Help podcast. Rebecca, how'd I do? All right, hon?
That was awesome, John. Thank you so much. Yes, I loved that intro.
All right. Sometimes, listen, you got to stop me. Sometimes I get all worked up. I'll just start rambling. It'll be a 5-10 minute intro, and then we'll go, what the hell's he doing? So I see you all over social media, and mainly the platform I see you on is Instagram. And you're always out there kind of talking. So we've got subject matter experts in all areas of our life, right? We got people talking about our relationships. We got people talking about some abuse issues. We've got people talking about, and I think the sleeper in all of that is our finances, is our money. I think people have sometimes a harder time talking about money than they do relationships.
100%. There is, and the reason for that is because the way that we view money now stems back from when we were children and the conversations that happened in our home around money, right, or lack of conversations, right? So if you grew up in a house where money wasn't talked about, chances are you're not going to talk about money in your adult life either, because that's your experience. And so what my goal is I want to kind of break down those walls, break down those barriers around a topic that most people don't even want to approach, especially when it comes to relationships, right? I think money is probably one of the hardest conversations to have with your significant other.
Yeah, so I've matured a lot in the last few years, if you can believe. Listen, I'm 56 and I'm just starting to figure it out, right? So I hate to crush anyone's hopes and dreams out there, but it takes sometimes, if you don't have guidance and direction and mentoring and somebody that can show you the way, then you figure it out on your own, hopefully, eventually, and it may take some time. I remember not wanting to talk about our funds because when we did, I felt like the status of me being a man and providing for my household was being questioned. And I took issue with that. Like, I'm busting my balls, but it wasn't somebody was trying to question or undermine. It was just like a legitimate question, like, do we have enough money to do this? And I would be like, I take that like you're taking a shot at me.
Right. 100%, especially if you're working a bunch of overtime, right? Like, right, you're working the grind day in and day out. And, that was one of the things that kind of got my husband and I on this path, was he was working so much overtime. And it was like our bank account, whether he worked just base pay or overtime, our bank account was still the same amount of money before each paycheck. So it didn't matter how much money we made, because we still ended up with the same amount in the bank. And so we knew once we kind of made that connection, like, there's something amiss, like there's something that we're not doing right with our money, and we need to get to the bottom of it and figure out what it is. And we got to do it together, because, it takes two of us, right?
Rebecca, so you have a background in public finance management, and then you're married to a sheriff's deputy out there in Cali, And you just, the situation you just described, you're like, you're working your tail off, but we're no better off financially. There's a problem.
Hmm.
So is it safe for me to assume that you kind of brought this to his attention? Like, hey, hon, you're working all these hours, but we're not financially doing any better in the account? Or how'd that play out? How'd that conversation start?
No, so it was actually my husband that kind of, and I think I knew all along because I was the one who was managing our money.
Right.
I knew and saw the patterns all along, but it was one of those things where it's kind of goes back to that not wanting to rock the boat in the relationship, right? It's like I didn't have the tools at that time to approach that conversation in a way that wasn't going to start an argument. So I just decided not to have the conversation. And one day, my husband came to me, and this was actually spurred on by an action of his. And I've told this story on Instagram, so many times, I feel like, but basically, the catalyst to all of this is that my husband had taken his father to a San Jose Earthquakes soccer game one year. My husband's family's from Mexico, so soccer is like deep in their blood.
Right.
And so for my husband to be able to take his dad to a soccer game and they sat front row, that was like a very proud moment for him. Like, we've been doing so well, bringing in the money that we can afford to take his parents to do these fun activities.
Huge.
And then he came home that evening and he said, I think I want to get season tickets. And again, me being the wife that doesn't want to rock the boat, I was like, okay, well, what's like the monetary plan for this? And he's like, I've already figured out, I'll just work the overtime to pay for it. It's going to cost X amount of money each month, and we'll have it paid off by the end of the year. So, signed the contract, whatever. And then come to realize the contract was actually for 3 years.
Boom.
And yes. And so he came to me about a week later and he's like, I think I made a mistake.
Oh man. Yeah. Right.
And so, yeah. And we tried to get out of the contract, but those contracts, they're pretty much ironclad. So we were like, hey, we kind of dug ourselves into this hole, and now we need to figure out a way to get ourselves out of it. And that was really kind of what started it all.
You mentioned something that not only, listen, you don't know me, but I am the king of rationalization. Rebecca, there's not a situation you could present to me that I wouldn't be able to rationalize a way in or around of. And so your husband's response to a new financial obligation was my response. And the vast majority of all first responders out there, I'll pick up an extra shift. I'll work the port next weekend. You know what? Football season's coming up. We've got some escorts coming up. I'll just put myself on the list. I'll run some escorts. Easy peasy. We make great money. I'll just come up. But I think what ends up happening is we run out of hours in the day.
Yeah. And then your family starts missing you, right? Like
a little bit.
It starts to create a little bit of that resentment on the family front, especially if you have kids at home and, the spouse is left at home to kind of manage the household while the LEO is out, working all the hours to maintain this lifestyle that you are now accustomed to, or the financial obligations that you have, put onto yourself.
Right. And not to go down the relationship path, but when that happens and you're at work trying to provide for your family, but you've overextended, so you're never home, guess what happens? Your spouse finds somebody that gives her attention that you can't give her because you're working. And that's the first wedge in the relationship. Mm-hmm. And that's where things start getting sideways. So your financial health plays a critical role in your relationship health.
100%. Not to mention that, second to infidelity, financial challenges in a relationship are the second leading cause of divorce.
1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like you can't have one without the other. They're always going to be paired. because these are two areas that we don't like to discuss.
Yeah, exactly. So, but we need to start talking. We need to
Yeah, we
start
do.
talking
And
about
that's
it
why we're
because
sitting down today. This is awesome. So, Rebecca, you come to this realization like, all right, I love the work ethic, hon. You're killing it, but we're not making any progress. So, what's like the first step? Because you just described, again, for as unique as we think we are, you just described the financial climate of 80% of the people out there listening. We're working our tails off, but we don't have those reserves. We're kind of almost paycheck to paycheck. What's in your professional opinion, after we have the conversation, like there's a problem, what do we do next?
so our very first step was, okay, we need to get a handle on all of our debt accounts, between credit cards, student loans, car loans, those stupid like pay in four loans. Like whatever, you can like split a big purchase up into 4 different payments, like all of that stuff. We don't think about it at the time because you're like, oh, that payment seems pretty easy, right? It's only going to be $35 every couple of weeks. But when you say that for multiple purchases, and then all of a sudden that $35 becomes $100, becomes $150, and you're not really paying attention. And so my thing is, figure out what are your debt obligations and how much are your minimums each month.
Like write it down. Like
Write it down.
no
Like
guess,
list
no
it out.
guesstimating, no like,
No.
oh, I think we'll go. It's a ballpark. We're right around. Write that stuff down.
Put it out there because that's going to be your biggest eye opener, because that is your monthly obligation that you have to pay towards something that you purchased yesterday, last month, last year even. And
And when
so
you do that, Rebecca, are you including all your regular other monthly expenses too that are recurring, or just initially the credit card stuff?
I would initially start with the credit cards, because
Okay.
here's the thing with all of your other expenses, right? Is we know those are expenses that are going to happen no matter what.
Okay.
Right? So the debt we can control. We can't necessarily control. We still want to look at those other expenses, and we will look at those other expenses. But what's making it seem so hard for you to live from paycheck to paycheck, or what is really draining your bank account, most likely, now there's going to be other factors, but most likely it's going to be those debt obligations each month, because they rack up so quickly.
Right. And so once we do that, we have a sense of, these are our credit cards, these are our balances, this is our minimum payments or the payments that we're making. What do we do then? What do we do then at that point?
Yeah. So usually what I do with clients is, it kind of depends on what motivates them. Because I always start out my sessions with like, I want to know, what are your goals, right? Because I don't want to hear that paying off your debt is your goal. That's not a fun goal. No. Nobody wants to pay off debt, right? That's not motivating. And so I always start with like, what's your why? Why are you doing this? Because you're going to need to anchor yourself to that, because it's about to get really painful when you start attacking those debts, right? It's going to be painful. It's going to be worth it, but it's going to be painful. So you need a strong why to anchor yourself into. And then I always tell them, list out your debts. And there's a few different ways that you can do it. The most common way is the snowball method, which is from the smallest debt to the largest debt. And you pay off the smallest debt, pay minimums on the rest of them. And then once that smallest debt is paid off, you take whatever you were paying on that debt and apply it to the next debt, and so on and so forth. And eventually your snowball gets really big, so you pick up momentum a lot quicker. That's really good for people who have like a lot of debt accounts.
So you wouldn't, I joke, you wouldn't go out and take a home equity loan to pay off your high credit cards and consolidate them all now into, why is that a bad idea?
So the thing with money is, most people think it's about numbers, Money is not about numbers. The way that we make decisions on how we spend our money is based on our emotions. Okay. And it's a mindset, right? And so if you're going to bail yourself out, and not only that, but you're going to prolong how long you carry around that debt, right? Because your mortgage is not just a 5-year mortgage.
No.
It's a 30-year mortgage, right? So now you're extending the life of that debt. And chances are you're going to end up paying more on it by doing that.
I always tell people, Rebecca, I said, unless you change the way you look at money, if you take a home equity line off to pay off a $30,000 credit card debt and you do nothing with the way you look at money, interact with money, the way you, in a year's time, you'll be back with a $30,000 credit card debt. It's just, it's not like you just said it perfectly. It's not it's not the numbers. It's not the numbers. It's up here. It's in your noggin.
Yep.
And sometimes that's the hardest thing to deal with.
It is. And again, it goes back to your childhood too. It goes back to how money was managed in your house, the conversations that were had in your house regarding money. And we internalize that and carry that into our adult life. And so oftentimes it's really about addressing what you learned as a child and trying to unlearn that as an adult.
Especially when you find yourself, I guess we all have different thresholds, right? Like what may drive me crazy from a financial standpoint may be something that someone else is like, oh no, I'm okay with carrying a balance. Like I lose my mind when I have a balance on a card. It's like, it can't happen. For me, it's like, all right, something went wrong this month. If I have a balance at the end of the month, if it's been a crazy month, like I've had family in town and, we were out of our normal routine, then it's an anomaly, right? Then I know it was kind of a one-time thing. But I think a lot of people, they're okay with carrying that because again, that the ability to rationalize, well, I'll make a payment. It won't be paid in full, but I don't think they realize what are they paying in interest when they don't pay a credit card off in full at the end of the month.
Credit cards are the worst thing to carry a balance on because the interest rate is so high. You would be lucky to find a credit card with a 14% interest rate. Most are going to be anywhere from 14%. And some is like those department store cards, they're 25% interest.
That's insane.
25% interest.
So, I mean, listen, I'm not a mathematician. That's for every $100, $25. Like, yeah. Think of it in those terms. That's a quarter.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So if you put $10,000 on that credit card, that's an extra $2,500 that you will be paying off.
Right. That's insane.
Yeah.
Probably for something that you didn't need in the first place, which
exactly.
gets back to the mental component of it. So we've sat down, we've had the tough conversation, right? Nobody's walked out of the room, nobody's taken their ball and gone home, right? We're adults. We're starting to take some action. We've listed our credit cards. We've maybe employed a snowball effect to start addressing the problem, right? Is that about the time where we look at a budget? Talk to me about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think the misnomer is that budgets should be put in place when you're having problems with money. I would say that like a budget, am I right or am I wrong? A budget's like what you should have when you're doing well. It's like
100%.
Budget does, you have a budget when you're doing well, so you don't end up in the trick bag, right?
The best time to do smart things with your money is when you're doing really well with money.
Okay. So
that's across the board. Anything you do with your money, the best time to do it is when you have money.
How about that? I know it sounds obvious, right? But I think when people have money or doing well, or it's the season, right? It's the whatever season, and there's a surplus. I think a lot of people throw caution to the wind. Like, we're rolling. Like, don't worry about that. Go ahead and, sweetheart, we're going out tonight, and it's just like, whoa, that's the 5th time this week you've gone out.
Yep.
That's going to be a problem maybe sooner rather than later. So speak to us about budgets. And what's your theory on, I like a weekly budget. I just think, like, by the end of the month, it's like too late to adjust. Like, if you're over coming into week 3, if you don't know you're over in week 3, week 4 comes in, you're like, how do we why are we 1,500 over budget? And you're just like, oh, well, maybe we should not have gone out and bought that, hippity hoss or whatever you bought for the kid, right? That they didn't need.
100%. Yeah. So there's a couple of things to that. So I have started to refrain from using the term budget. I still use it occasionally just because I think
it doesn't have anything to do with pronouns, does it? It's not.
No.
Okay, good.
No,
All right.
it's actually,
you're getting me nervous. You're getting me nervous, Rebecca.
No. It's mostly because
another word we can't use.
A lot of people who hear the word budget, they're automatically like, oh gosh. And it's like, it's restrictive. Somebody's going to tell me how to spend my own money, blah, 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 blah. And so I've transitioned to calling it a spending plan. Okay. Right. So it's a plan for how
I can live with a spending plan.
It's a plan for how we're going to spend our money.
I like it.
You have full authority on how that plan goes, right? As the individual creating it. So it's nobody telling you how to spend your money. You are telling yourself how you're going to spend your money.
I'm going to Vegas and I'm putting it on red.
Yeah,
plan.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
So now when it comes to, how should you structure your budget? I do the budget by paycheck model. Okay. So basically so whether you're, get paid weekly, you get paid bi-weekly, you get paid monthly, it all just depends on the frequency of your paycheck. And so basically your paycheck comes in and you say, okay, well, I've got all of these bills that are coming due within this time frame. And so you make sure that all of those bills are paid first. And then you figure out, what you need for your groceries and so on and so forth. So now, when I first started out, we were very heavy on we're cutting costs as much as possible so we can throw anything extra towards our debt. I usually tell my clients, what's going to be most comfortable to you? Because here's one thing as, law enforcement or first responder families is we don't want to just cut back down to bare bones, right? Because the job's a stressor and we need to be able to disconnect when we get home. And sometimes for people that's going out to a nice dinner, it's making sure that they can still go on vacations, things like that. And so I try the whole point of getting healthy with your money is developing healthy habits. Okay. And that also means not feeling guilty about spending your money. And so
makes sense.
So each client's going to be different based on what are their true motivations and what are they trying to accomplish. I have some clients that are just no, everything extra, we're just throwing it at our debt. And we have other ones that are okay with paying off their debt a little bit slower so they can partake in some of these other, life adventures.
I think it's important to like Rebecca, like with anything, having some balance, right? Having some balance, and that's going to be different for everybody. I think, I like one of the things that is a must is our gym membership. That's time that we set aside to be physically and mentally tuned in, healthy. Taking that away, the money that I would save mentally, I think it would cost me. Physically, it would cost me. So that's one of those that it's in the I'm keeping category.
Yep.
Maybe one that it's funny. I was thinking the other night. So my wife asked me what was we were watching Succession. It's a show about this power family. big conglomerate, big media mogul, and all these different. And I'm like, what streaming service is that on? And we went through Apple TV, Hulu, HBO Max, Netflix, and Prime. I've got, and then YouTube TV for my regular TV. I've got six media platforms. And do I need six? And if I could, if I wanted to cut back, you think there might be a little bit of room to do that? And it's just like, holy moly, what the hell is going on? It wasn't, I had to go through all of them to find this stupid show. And I just went, we've got way too, this is asinine. This is a place that we're going to chop, because between, like, I really only need two, my regular TV provider, and like pick one that you like that has a nice variety, right? I mean, that's normal.
And that doesn't include any other memberships, right? Like your Amazon Prime, or if you pay for Spotify, or before we were doing this, I was getting this like quarterly like lifestyle box in the mail, like quarterly, and then I had like a wine membership, and I had like all these memberships.
That's awesome.
You know what I mean? And once you write all that stuff out, you're like, we're spending how much?
The wine membership. Listen, don't tell my wife about the wine membership, okay? It's gonna be another battle we're gonna have about the wine. But so I guess the point of all this, other than busting chops a little bit, is that if you look, there are things that can go away without causing you great pain.
Yes, absolutely. And here's the thing. If you are really adamant about keeping your subscriptions, keep your subscriptions. I would say probably the one area that most of us are overspending is going to be our food category, and groceries and restaurants combined, right? So, and when my husband and I crunched our numbers that first time, and we were on vacation when we did this.
Okay.
And so we crunched the numbers. I basically kind of like linked our bank account to this budgeting app and pulled the previous month's transactions and just kind of sorted them by category. I'm a huge numbers nerd when it comes to budgeting. So my budget, I feel, is kind of complex, but when I realized how much money we were spending on just eating out. Now, mind you, this was so we started this in July of 2021. So we were just a little over a year into the pandemic, right? And so that's kind of when that, like DoorDash and Uber Eats and all of that became really big during that time.
Yep.
And so that made up a majority of, because we were just ordering food to the house all the time, and then going out to restaurants. $1,000 in 1 month we spent on eating out. And once we realized that, like, that is like, how much of a dent can we make in our debt?
Right.
If we just cut that out for a few months.
Sure.
And, or even just cut it down by 75%. You know what I mean? Like, still enjoyed, the convenience of having food delivered or going out to eat. But our food categories, we don't realize, because a lot of times what happens is we go to the grocery store with every intention of cooking at home that entire week,
right,
or for however long you purchase your groceries for. And then what happens? You have a rough day, you're tired, you're exhausted,
right,
you don't want to cook a meal. Okay, let's just order out, or let's go out to eat. And we rationalize that pretty
100%,
easily.
100%.
Pretty easily.
Because it doesn't seem like you're splurging. It seems like a necessity in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so funny. We've got Publix down here in Florida. It's your regular supermarket.
Yeah.
And ridiculous amount, because it's on the way home from the gym. We pass by it on our way home from the gym. And it's like, you know what? I just need to run in and get $150 later. Like, we got 2 bags in our hands. And I'm just like, the hell is going on? And so, like, without even thinking about it, that gets crazy, it gets all jacked up. And so what we ended up doing was going to like Costco
Mm.
for like our meats, for our chickens and our, I like red meat, I like steak. But like we had to start thinking like, listen, we'll get it, we'll freeze it, we'll save some money, and the stuff that doesn't stay long, that we can't freeze, we'll pick that stuff up at Publix. But like our steaks, our chicken, our fish, we're gonna get them someplace where the cost is a little more affordable. And
Mm-hmm.
like taking that step, like if we're doing that, like the majority of people, I think, are not, I don't want to say struggling, but this is an issue. Like just having food in the house, with the way prices have been increasing and kind of across the board,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, and everything else is going up exponentially. Don't try to insure a house in Florida right now.
Oh
Um,
gosh.
my we people are
You
getting
guys in Texas.
we just got whacked with, like, my neighbors just got like a 200 or 300% increase in his premium. How do you
Mm.
can't budget for that, right? I mean, like, so all these things, that's money that has to be spent. And so, you're starting to look like, well, how am I saving money? What do I need to do? And so these are all on top of a very stressful profession, right?
Yeah.
You're going to work stressed, and now you're worrying about, am I going to be able to keep all these things in check? It gets to
Yeah.
be a little overbearing at times.
It
Um,
does. And that's why I mentioned, the best time to plan is when, you have some money coming in, or you have a good nest egg that you're already
sure.
sitting on. Like, now's the time to create your plan. Because, going back to the example you gave about the homeowner's insurance
Hmm.
and that premium that went up, you're right. Like, how can you anticipate something like that? However, if you already have an emergency fund established, that can soften that blow, right?
Excellent. Excellent. Emergency fund. So you're like, all right, Rebecca, you're killing me. So on top of all this, you want me to put some extra money under the mattress, so to speak, for an emergency. And I think what do they say? 3 to 6 months is ideal, Rebecca,
Mm-hmm.
uh, of your monthly household bills. Like that's what you
Mm-hmm.
want stashed somewhere. And that's a significant amount of money. And I think because you hear that number, I think that keeps people from ever starting one. They're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'll never be able to save that much
Mm-hmm.
money. So they just say, the hell with it. I'll just figure it out. That's a response from people.
Yeah.
Like, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's really not figuring it out.
No. So have you heard the phrase, how do you eat an elephant?
I repeat that phrase to whenever someone comes to me with a lot on their plate and they're overwhelmed. I go, how would we eat this elephant? And they look at me like I'm half. All right, I know what you're gonna. Yeah, one bite at a time, John.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So yeah, man. So if you know what I'm gonna say, why don't you do it? Right. So
Yes. And
one
so
step at a
here's the
time.
thing is, you're not going to have your emergency fund in place tomorrow. That's just, it's not going to happen unless for some reason you get a huge windfall of cash coming in for
Right.
whatever reason. So the thing that my husband and I have implemented, and we just implemented this starting January of this year. It took us a while to really kind of fine tune how we were managing our own money. And so a couple things happened when we were like really gung-ho about paying off debt. Is our savings wasn't, it just kind of sat stagnant. It just
Right.
wasn't really growing any. And then we also had guilt around spending money. And my husband didn't want to feel guilty if for whatever reason while he's on shift he wanted to go grab an energy drink or whatever. And I didn't want to feel guilty going to the Starbucks after I dropped the kids off at school.
Sure.
And so we came up with this plan, and we decided that I call it, it's actually not, I can't take credit for it. This is actually a Robert Kiyosaki model, but Robert Kiyosaki in his book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, talks about paying yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
So, and what that means is generally when we get our money into our bank account, that money's pretty much already allocated towards like bills and other responsibilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what my husband and I did is like, okay, the second that paycheck hits our account, automatically 10% is going to our goals fund, 10% is going to our emergency savings, and then 5% split between the two of him. So I get 2.5%, he gets 2.5%, goes to our personal discretionary funds, meaning we get 2.5% of that paycheck to spend however we want, and the other person can't say anything.
Mm.
And then everything else goes to bills, groceries, gas, whatever. And so automatically we are paying ourselves first. We are paying our savings first, and then we are paying ourselves personally first. And then whatever's left over, that's what we have for our responsibilities. And the thing is there, and this is Robert Kiyosaki's idea behind this, is like, let's say you do that and you find out that you don't have enough money to cover the rest of these funds, right?
That was the question. Yes.
Yes. So here's the thing. You either figure out a way to pay for those, right? Or you are really able to identify those expenses that aren't that important to you and start checking those off and crossing them off and just getting rid of them. Because if you're looking at an expense and you're like, I really don't care if we have that. It doesn't bother me that we don't have the money to pay for that. Cool. Then it's an expense that you don't need. So you really need to, money is emotional. We go back to that. Money is emotional, right? But we have to take control of our money and not have our money control us. And so by doing that is when we start to take ownership of it, is when we start telling our money where it's going instead of our money just leaving our bank account without much knowledge of where it's actually going.
Yeah, and I think once people start doing that, right, it empowers them, right? They're not, you know, they're not a victim to this, oh, woe is me, I'm working so hard, but I can't get ahead, and they just wallow in a situation where they actually have more control over it than they're going to give themselves credit for. It's just, it requires them to come up with an action plan, right? To identify the problem, come up with a plan, and then implement it.
Yep. Yeah.
Not
no, it's not. And then one thing that I forgot to mention that we did just start this year as well, along with, so 20% goes to our savings, but we're also putting an additional 10% into like an outside retirement fund. So not towards like his pension, whatever goes towards his pension, that's automatic. We don't have control over that. But now we have our own investment fund.
Nice.
Well, not our, but that we're putting an additional 10%.
Sure.
So that way, because that's the whole thing is, we assume that the pensions that we're paying into are going to be enough for us to retire on, but we don't really know that for sure. We don't know what prices are going to be, when we're ready to retire.
Sure.
We don't know, how much debt we're going to be carrying. We don't know how much is going to be left on our house that we still need to pay for. So there's a lot of unknown factors. And so the more money that you can be putting into other investment funds, whether it's an additional retirement fund or just, some kind of like, just some other kind of investment fund.
Your 457, your deferred comp, your another
100%,
whatever, your own, a Roth or a regular IRA or something.
Yep.
Something. Yeah, that's important. I mean, it's one of those things that, financial literacy, I think we're getting better, right? We're getting better because people are seeing, like, what's he doing back? Oh, that's Jimmy. I thought he retired. Yeah, he did, but he wasn't. One divorce later, this, that. You got guys, on the job in their mid to late 60s, which they should not be doing, You should not be, unless you're the sheriff, you should not be in your 60s doing this job. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's a young man's game, and the sooner you can get out of it financially intact, the better. You mentioned a little bit about pensions. Now, there's been a shift, I think. I can't speak nationally. I can just kind of speak for Florida. But in Florida, we had a defined plan. You work this many years, you get 75% of your top 5 years. And for the majority of our time, it was non-contributory. I didn't pay into it. The guys right now are paying 3% into their pension. And most of them, if they're smart, have a 457, a deferred comp, another fund that they're putting chunks of money in. But municipalities and sheriffs, they're getting away from that. It's all kind of turning into an investment fund where there's no guarantee of return.
Mm-hmm.
You're in the market, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
and you have options, how risk tolerances and all this stuff, but that scares the heck out of people because at the end of the day, it's a gamble. Like for people, for first responders, like that have no problem like running into dangerous situations and not knowing what's going to happen. Like we do that, like we're excited to do that with our money. It petrifies us.
Absolutely. And, investments are still something new that my husband and I we told ourselves that this year, that's what we're going to focus on, is really educating ourselves on what it means to be investors. And because there's so many different things that you can invest in. And so it's really about making sure that you make a smart decision. And each person is going to have a different risk tolerance. Some people are super conservative with their money, and others are willing to just, they want to trade stock options and all of that. But it for us is, there's so many YouTube videos out there, and mind you, you want to make sure that what you're listening to is from a credible source.
Sure.
But I've found that learning from different YouTube videos, and I can't think of any right off the top of my head,
Yeah.
but just learning the basics of what it means to invest your money.
Right.
So for me, I didn't want to go with and mind you, I'm not a fiduciary. I do not provide investment advice.
Right.
I'm just talking about what I do personally. I didn't want to go the financial advisor route because I wasn't comfortable with the fees that are associated with that. And so I just started doing research, and a lot of my other financial coaching buddies recommend Vanguard. And so that's what I set my IRA up through. And so, and on top of that is we're also looking into real estate investing. And so there's a lot of different options that you can do, but the main piece is like, you just kind of have to get out there and educate yourself and just learn what it means, because there are definitely some safer ways to invest. And especially if you're just going to put your money into a fund that's just going to sit there until you retire, most of those funds average on the long term, at least anywhere from 8 to 10% in returns.
Right.
And I think a lot of people are scared right now because we're technically in a recession when it comes to the stock market. So all we hear are the stocks have dropped, people are losing money. But if you really listen to people who are really avid investors in the stock market, now is the best time to get into it.
Right. It's funny. So, I think when it comes to listen, I don't purport to be an expert in any of this, but it's been my experience that we need to be kind of mindful of who we seek counsel with, because I have a neighbor who is extremely well multimillionaire, and so a $100,000 loss to him is not substantial.
Mhm.
$100,000 loss to John Kelly is. So,
Mhm.
and so when you speak to people and the advice that they give you, understand the financial position that they're coming from. And
Mhm.
it's not all apples and oranges. And so, you know, I take that advice through that lens. Like he can absorb $100,000 loss and be it won't even register with him.
Mhm.
But it most certainly with me. So vetting, right? Vetting the source, making sure that we're talking with not only reputable people, but people who understand the nuances between maybe what they're investing in and what you're doing. I think a lot of times, well, he's doing really well, so I'll just do what he's doing, and I don't think that that's the best plan.
No. And you know what's really cool about when I signed up for my Vanguard account is they have like a little quiz you can take that essentially like assesses your risk tolerance,
Mm-hmm.
and then and like what you want to get out of your investment. Like what are you hoping? Like are you using it for retirement? Or are you just kind of using it as like you just want to grow your money kind of thing?
Right.
And then it gives you like a guide on like, okay, you should have, X percentage of your investments in stocks. You should have X percentage of your investment in bonds. And they have their index funds. And so basically they already have funds that meet those specific criteria
Sure.
that pop out of that out of the little quiz that you take. And so I found that to be very helpful because it assessed, okay, this is what my risk tolerance is. Now here's an index fund that matches what your risk tolerance is and what you're hoping to get out of your investment.
Yeah, it's nice when some of these platforms can provide some of that guidance and direction for you. Hey, Rebecca, before we wrap up, I wanted to talk about, we talked a little bit before we started this about insurance and the role that that plays. And I I got educated a little late in the game, but it allowed me some financial freedom that you wouldn't think having life insurance would. Um, can you speak a little bit about that? And I'd like to get your take
Absolutely.
on something that I did with my situation, because I know everybody's situations are unique, but it kind of opened my eyes in the way that life insurance can be used while you're living to kind of reap the benefit from it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So my recommendation when it comes to life insurance, and my husband and I, we got ours set up maybe like it was right at the beginning of this whole journey for us. And we kind of realized that um I didn't realize, I was naive to it, being the wife of a law enforcement officer, that I just for some reason thought that he was already paying into one, or like the department had one set up for him or something. And when I found out it was like they did, but it was like something like
Or
$10,000. I'm like,
if you're
that's,
lucky, if you're
yeah,
lucky,
it's
it won't
like,
even cover the
I'm
funeral
like,
costs. Yeah,
dude, yeah. And so we jumped on that right away. And we went through at the time we went through Xander Insurance, and which is kind of like a brokerage, just kind of like helps you find the best deal.
sure.
And so we got both of ours set up at about $500,000 a piece. And usually what I recommend to people, and the general rule of thumb, is you want to get life insurance that's anywhere from 8 to 10 times the individual's annual income. So whatever that individual's annual income, 8 to 10 times that amount. And
Okay.
so we're only doing about half of that right now, and we're going to be upping it here pretty soon. But and really, the life insurance, what it's there for is to make sure that the surviving spouse can survive, stay in their house, can support their children if they still have children in the home, can support themselves. And also it's a peace of mind, because if my husband were to die in the line of duty, do you think I want to go back to work? No, I don't want to go. I don't want to have to get my 3 bereavement days and then go back to work.
Mm,
Like there's no healing in that, right?
right.
There's, especially if you have little kids at home. And so that just affords you the freedom to take a leave of absence from work, or quit your job and say, I'm going to figure out what to do my next step
Right.
after I take some time off to properly grieve and mourn the loss of my loved one. And so that's why life insurance is so important, especially in this industry, because you don't know, especially with
Right.
today's climate, there's too many ambushes going on. You don't know what's going to happen on shift that day.
No, I've always found it kind of so, I did 30 years and, looking back, I never really, I had a policy here and there, a little extra policy, but it wasn't until I started to look at retirement that I truly appreciated the importance of life insurance. Um, and, life insurance used to mitigate not only the risk of you dying, but utilizing that nest egg now. My whole concern was, well, what if something happens to me? I need to take care of Nicole and Brianna. Well, initially my plan was my deferred comp and my drop account that would take care of them.
Mhm.
But that's not a lot, it's not a lot of money to live the rest of your life on. And we think it is.
Mhm.
$1 million is not a lot of money to live the rest of your life on.
Mm-mm.
So when we mitigate the risk of dying with a healthy, substantial life insurance policy, 2.5 million works tax free
Mhm.
because it's being paid as a life insurance
Mhm.
settlement. And so now you're talking about real comfort in bereavement. That
Yep.
you don't have to worry about selling the house. You don't have to worry about where the next paycheck's coming. You don't have to worry about providing. And I just throw this out there: the magical age is 50. You got to do all of this before you turn 50 because the premiums just they become rather unaffordable after age 50.
Yeah.
But
And
having that plan is important.
there are some great policies out there that are very supportive of the first responder lifestyle. There's a policy that we're getting ready to switch over to that gives us, I want to say it's a 25-year term, but then after the 25-year term, it rolls into a whole life insurance
Okay.
policy for the last part of. So that way, when we're in our elder years, when you're not going to get yourself a term policy at that age, and the whole policies at that age are astronomical, we already have it set up to where our term is going to transition to a whole life at the end of it. And so that can carry us out, hopefully.
Payable upon your death.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. So many options, which is why, again, you need to do your homework, you need to research it, and you need to speak with people that have been vetted, that truly have your best interests at heart. Rebecca, one thought, like, let's do this. If somebody wants to reach out to you, if somebody wants to find you, if somebody's got, man, I listened to John and Rebecca, I've got all these questions. How can we find you? How can we contact you? How does that happen? What does that look like?
Yeah. So, like you said before, I'm super active on Instagram at Blue Line Money Coach. And my website is priority1fc.com. And then you can also reach me by email at Rebecca at priority1fc.com.
And I'll put all that information in the show notes. So everybody, if you didn't catch it or you don't need to write it down, um, take copious notes. You don't need to get into all that. I'll provide all that for you. Rebecca, if you could leave the listener, right? That maybe they're on their way in, they're on their way home from shift, maybe they just had an argument about money, and they're kind of at their wits' end and they're looking for a little light. What's something you could share with them and or a thought that would be helpful for them if you could before we wrap?
It's getting healthy with your money it doesn't take as long as most people think it. It's not like this dark pit of where that you're never going to wade out of. My husband and I tell people that it kind of starts in phases. Usually it takes like the first 3 months for you to kind of start to get your handle on it. By 6 months, you feel like you're starting to get control. And then by the end of that first year, it's like, you're like, okay, what's the next step? Like, we have a handle on this. Like, let's figure out what we're going to do next. So it really doesn't take that long. I mean, what's 1 year in the grand scheme of things, right? Yeah. Because here's the thing, your life, if today you don't make a single change, that time's going to pass regardless. Right? That time's going to pass regardless. So do you want to make that change today and be in a completely different space 1 year from now? Or do you want to be in the same space that you're in today?
The choice is yours, right? It always has been. Always has been. Ladies and gentlemen, Rebecca Jameson, thanks for your time today, hon. Bunch of excellent information. Certainly given us a lot to think about and how we can become financially healthy. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, I had such a blast talking with you today, John.
Thanks so much.